The wind of the Arizona desert moved like an old song, carrying dust and the scent of dry sage. It whispered across the wide open land where tall rocks stood like silent guardians and the sky stretched endlessly. In that land lived a young Apache woman named Taya. Her tribe had lived among those red cliffs and quiet rivers for generations, long before any white settlers came with their wagons, cattle, and fences. Taya was small and graceful, with long black hair that shimmered in the sun. Her eyes were calm but sharp like the still water of a deep spring. She spoke little, preferring silence to careless talk. Many who met her thought she was shy, but those who truly looked saw the quiet strength she carried. Her people had taught her that silence could speak louder than words. Every few weeks, Taya would travel to the small frontier town of Dry Creek to trade herbs, woven blankets, and clay pots. The journey took nearly half a day on foot, and she would carry her goods wrapped in a deerskin bundle. The town was small, just a row of wooden buildings, a dusty main street, and a few horses tied outside the saloon. It was a rough place, full of miners, traders, and ranch hands. And for someone like Taya, it was not a welcoming place. The moment she stepped into town, she could feel the stares. People paused in their work to look at her. Some muttered under their breath. A few women pulled their children closer. She kept her head high, pretending not to hear. Taya had learned long ago that pride was not in how loudly you spoke, but in how you carried yourself when others looked down on you. At the general store, she placed her goods neatly on the counter. Mr. Phelps, the storekeeper, was an older man with a gray beard and sharp eyes. He didn't smile much, but he always dealt fairly with her. "Morning, Miss Taya," he said, looking at her bundle. "Got some herbs today?" She nodded softly. "Yes, sir. Sage, mint, and willow bark." He examined her work and gave her a few coins and some flour in exchange. It wasn't much, but she was thankful. Outside, a group of young men stood near the saloon. They watched her as she passed, whispering and laughing. She didn't look at them, but she could hear their words, teasing, mocking. One of them called out, "Hey, look, the little desert princess is back." Another added, "Maybe she's here to teach us her savage tricks." The laughter followed her down the street like stones being thrown at her back. Taya walked faster, gripping her bundle. She wanted to leave, to go back to the safety of the desert where the wind didn't laugh and the mountains didn't judge. But just as she passed the blacksmith shop, an older woman stepped out in front of her. "You people should stay in your camps," the woman said harshly. "This town isn't for your kind." Taya froze for a moment, her lips pressed tight. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. So she lowered her eyes slightly, gave a polite nod, and walked around her. That night, back in her camp, Taya sat by the fire with her grandmother, who was weaving a blanket. The old woman looked at her granddaughter's quiet face and asked softly, "They mocked you again, didn't they?" Taya didn't answer. The flames flickered in her eyes, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she whispered, "It doesn't matter, grandmother. The earth still knows my name even if they do not." Her grandmother smiled faintly. "Yes, the earth remembers who we are. Never let their words make you forget." The next morning, Taya returned to her daily work, gathering herbs, helping her mother grind corn, and tending to the small garden near their hut. The air smelled sweet with mesquite flowers, and for a moment, life felt peaceful again. But fate has a way of bringing new people into our lives when we least expect it. That afternoon, while collecting herbs near the edge of town, Taya heard the sound of a horse approaching. She turned and saw a young man riding slowly along the path. He wore a dusty hat, a plain shirt, and carried a rope coiled at his saddle. His face was tanned from the sun, his eyes calm and kind. He stopped a few feet away and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, miss," he said with a gentle tone. "Didn't mean to startle you." Taya hesitated, unsure what to say. She nodded politely and turned back to her herbs. The man didn't move on. He looked at her basket and said, "You know your plants well. I see you picking sage and mint together. That's a good mix for sickness, isn't it?" She looked up, surprised that he knew. "Yes," she said quietly. "It helps the chest," he smiled. "My ma used to make something like that back in Texas. Guess healing's the same no matter where you come from." Taya didn't know why, but she felt a strange warmth in her chest. This man didn't speak to her like the others did. His voice carried no mockery, no fear, just curiosity and respect. "My name's Eli Carter," he said. "I work over at the Miller Ranch. Maybe I'll see you around town again." She nodded slightly. "Maybe." And with that he rode off, leaving a trail of dust and a thought she couldn't quite name. That evening, when Taya told her grandmother about the encounter, the old woman listened quietly. Then she said, "Sometimes, child, the wind brings people into our lives for reasons we do not yet see. Be kind but careful." Taya nodded, though she didn't expect to see him again. But a few weeks later, when she went to Dry Creek for trade, she saw Eli again, this time outside the blacksmith's. He was helping an old man fix a wagon wheel. When he noticed her, he smiled and waved. She almost didn't wave back, afraid of what others might think. But then she remembered her grandmother's words and lifted her hand in return. From that day on, something began to change. When she came to town, Eli always greeted her kindly. Sometimes he brought her small things from the ranch, fresh milk or a piece of cloth his employer no longer needed. She thanked him each time, though she could feel the cold eyes of others watching. Whispers started again, this time about the cowboy who talked to that Apache girl. Some called him foolish. Others said he'd lose his job if he kept it up. But Eli didn't seem to care. When people mocked, he just shrugged. "She's as good a soul as any of you," he told them once at the saloon. Maybe better. No one knew what to say to that. Meanwhile, Taya's heart was quietly changing. She had spent most of her life trying to hide her kindness behind silence, afraid it would be twisted into weakness. But Eli saw it. He saw her strength in the way she cared for others, her patience, her steady hands when she worked. And though she tried not to show it, she began to look forward to the days she went into town. Still, she knew the line between them was wide. The world they lived in did not welcome such friendships. Even so, when their eyes met, the distance between the desert and the town seemed smaller. As the summer days grew longer, the townspeople continued to gossip. But neither Eli nor Taya gave them what they wanted, a show, a reason to hate more loudly. They simply lived quietly, their paths crossing beneath the endless western sky. Taya didn't yet know it, but this was the beginning of a story that would test both her courage and her heart. In a world that measured worth by color and birth, she was about to learn that love, when it comes, does not ask for permission. And though the wind of the desert carried many cruel words, it would soon carry something else too, a whisper of hope. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The hot desert sun rose each morning over Dry Creek, painting the town in gold and dust. For most people, life went on the same. Men worked on ranches, women cared for homes, and travelers passed through, leaving only footprints behind. But for Taya, something small but important had begun to change. She still walked to town with her bundle of herbs and goods, her quiet steps leaving faint marks in the dirt. Yet now there was one face in Dry Creek that didn't look at her with judgment or mockery. Eli Carter, the cowboy with the calm eyes, always greeted her like a friend. Sometimes it was just a smile or a polite good day, but to Taya those few words meant more than anyone could guess. One late afternoon, she arrived in town just as the sun began to sink behind the hills. The air was warm, the sky glowing orange and pink. As she walked past the livery stable, she heard a familiar voice. "Miss Taya." She turned and saw Eli leading his horse toward her. His hat was tilted back and his hands were rough with work, but his smile was easy and kind. "Didn't expect to see you today," he said, stopping beside her. "You come all the way from the hills again?" She nodded softly. "I bring herbs for trade." He looked at the small bundle she carried. "You walk alone every time?" "Yes," she answered simply. He frowned slightly. "That's a long walk. If you ever need a ride, I can meet you halfway. My horse doesn't mind company." Taya didn't know how to answer. No one had ever offered her help so kindly. She gave a small nod. "Thank you." They stood quietly for a moment, the sound of the horse's snort filling the space between them. Then Eli spoke again. "I was thinking, my ma used to dry herbs like these. Maybe you could show me how someday." Taya looked surprised. "You want to learn?" He chuckled softly. "Why not? A man never stops learning, right?" She gave a small, shy smile, the kind that only appeared for a second before fading away. Eli noticed it, though, and something warm settled in his heart. They began to meet more often, sometimes by accident, sometimes not. When Taya came to town, Eli always seemed to be nearby, helping at the stables, fixing a fence, or carrying grain to the store. He would find a moment to talk, ask about her herbs, or tell her stories about the ranch. She listened quietly, her eyes soft and curious. He liked that she didn't fill the air with empty words. Her silence was peaceful, like a calm river after a storm. One morning, as Taya traded goods at the store, she noticed Eli talking with Mr. Phelps. When he saw her, he smiled and tipped his hat. Mr. Phelps, however, gave him a disapproving look. "Careful, Eli," the storekeeper said in a low voice, though Taya still heard. "People talk. You don't want trouble, son." Eli's voice stayed calm. "I'm just being polite, Mr. Phelps. That's not trouble, it's manners." Mr. Phelps shook his head and turned away. Taya felt a pang in her chest. She didn't want anyone to face trouble because of her. As she left the store, she whispered softly, "You shouldn't talk to me so much. They don't like it." Eli looked at her seriously. "I don't care what they like. You've done nothing wrong." She lowered her eyes. "But they will talk about you." "Let them," he said with a small smile. "Words can't hurt me." But words did travel fast. Within days, people began whispering about the cowboy and the Apache girl. Some said Eli had lost his sense. Others laughed at him. A few warned him he could lose his job at the Miller Ranch if he kept keeping company with her. Yet no matter what they said, Eli didn't change. He kept helping her when he could, carrying her bundle, fixing the strap of her basket, or bringing her fresh water when the sun was too hot. One Sunday afternoon, Eli was in town helping the preacher fix a broken fence behind the small church. He saw Taya walking down the dusty road, her bundle balanced neatly on her shoulder. A few children were following her, giggling and throwing small pebbles near her feet. Before Eli could think, he stepped forward and called out, "Hey, that's enough!" The children stopped, startled. "She's not bothering anyone," he said firmly. "Go on home." They ran off, their laughter fading down the street. Taya looked at him, surprised and a little embarrassed. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. He shrugged. "Someone had to." She shook her head. "They're just children." "Maybe," he replied, "but they learn from grown folks. And grown folks around here don't seem to be teaching them right." That evening, as the sun set, Taya sat by the river that ran near her camp. She thought about Eli's words, his kindness, his quiet courage. She remembered how he spoke to her, not as someone lower, not as someone strange, but as a person. For years, she had believed that friendship between her people and the townsfolk was impossible. But Eli made her question that. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone in Dry Creek carried hate in their hearts. A few days later, Eli came to her camp for the first time. He had been riding out near the river to check on cattle when he saw the thin line of smoke from her fire. When he approached, she looked up, startled. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said quickly. "Just saw your fire." "It's all right," she said. "You can sit." He dismounted and tied his horse nearby. The camp was small, a few woven mats, a clay pot boiling over the fire, and a small hut made of branches and mud. It was simple but peaceful. "You live beautiful," he said, looking around. "Quiet but strong." Taya smiled faintly. "The land gives us what we need. We only take enough." He nodded. "Seems the rest of the world forgot how to do that." They talked until the stars came out, about the desert, about the rains, about life on the ranch. Taya told him how her grandmother taught her the names of plants, how each one had a spirit and a purpose. Eli listened with full attention, as if every word mattered. In return, he told her about Texas, the wide plains, and his dream of one day owning a ranch of his own. When he finally stood to leave, Taya handed him a small pouch filled with dried herbs. "For your cough," she said. "The dust makes it worse." He smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Taya. I'll take good care of it." Then he hesitated and added softly, "You're different from anyone I've ever met." She looked at him quietly. "Different isn't always good in this world." He met her eyes. "Maybe not to them, but to me it is." The next few months passed like that. Their friendship deepened, built on small kindnesses and honest words. Yet the more they grew closer, the more the town turned cold toward Eli. Men who used to share drinks with him now walked away. Some said he was losing his place, but Eli never argued, never raised his voice. He just kept living the way he believed was right. Taya, too, began to feel a quiet change inside. For the first time, she didn't dread her trips to town. She even found herself smiling more often, though she tried to hide it. Sometimes she would catch sight of Eli in the distance, fixing a fence, leading a horse, or carrying a sack of feed, and her heart would lift like a bird taking flight. One evening, as a summer storm rolled across the plains, Eli rode to her camp again, rain dripping from his hat. "You shouldn't be out in this," she said. "I came to check you were safe," he replied. "Storm's getting worse." "I'm fine," she said, looking up at the sky. "I like the rain. It reminds me that even the desert needs to cry sometimes." He smiled. "Then I guess I'll stay and cry with it." She laughed softly, and for the first time, the sound of her laughter filled the air. A sound so warm and real that Eli never forgot it. That night, they sat together by the fire as thunder rolled far away. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was gentle, like the space between two heartbeats. When he finally stood to go, she said quietly, "Be careful, Eli. The town won't like what they see." He looked at her, rain still dripping from his hat brim. "Let them look," he said. "I see something better." And as he rode away into the dark, Taya watched until his lantern faded into the distance. Her heart was calm, but deep inside she knew her life was changing. The cowboy who treated her like a person, not a stranger, had become part of her story. And in a world filled with walls, they had somehow found a small door, one that opened toward understanding, and maybe, just maybe, toward love. The wind over the desert began to change. The summer heat slowly softened and the evenings grew cooler. The rains had passed, leaving behind clear skies and the smell of damp earth. For a little while, everything felt peaceful again. Eli and Taya continued to see each other quietly. They never spoke of love or promises. Their bond didn't need words. A simple smile, a kind glance, a shared silence by the river, those were enough. Yet the world around them was not as kind. One morning, as Eli worked on the Miller ranch, his boss, Mr. Miller, called him over. "Eli," the older man said, wiping his brow, "you've been doing fine work, but folks are talking. They say you've been keeping company with that Apache girl outside town." Eli paused, his hands tightening around the fence post. "Her name's Taya," he said quietly. Mr. Miller sighed. "I don't care what her name is. People don't like it. I can't have trouble at my ranch. You understand?" Eli nodded slowly but said nothing more. Inside, though, his heart felt heavy. He didn't like gossip, and he didn't like being told who he could or couldn't speak to. That evening he rode to the river where Taya was gathering herbs. The golden light of sunset touched her hair, making it shine like dark copper. When she saw him, she smiled, but his face was serious. "They're talking again," he said quietly. Taya's smile faded. "I know. I hear it when I go to town. They look at me like I'm a shadow." Eli looked down at the river. "Mr. Miller told me to stay away from you." She nodded slowly, trying not to show her hurt. "You should listen to him," she said softly. "I don't want you to lose your work." He lifted his head. "Work I can find anywhere, but a person like you, there's only one." She looked at him with gentle eyes. "Eli, kindness brings trouble when the world isn't ready for it." "Then let the world be troubled," he said. Taya didn't answer. The sound of the water filled the space between them. She wanted to tell him she was grateful, that his friendship meant more than anything, but her words stayed in her heart. A few days later, word spread through Dry Creek that a small ranch to the north had been robbed in the night. The owners claimed it was the Apaches. No one knew for sure who had done it, but the rumor caught like fire in the wind. The town's fear turned quickly into anger. Men gathered at the saloon, talking loud and harsh. "Those savages will never change," one said. "They're stealing cattle now," another added. Before long, someone mentioned Taya's name. "That Apache girl, they say she comes into town to spy for her people." It wasn't true, but lies didn't need truth to travel. Eli heard the talk while he was in the stable, brushing his horse. His stomach twisted. He stepped outside and faced the group. "You're all wrong," he said firmly. "Taya's got nothing to do with that raid. She wouldn't harm anyone." One man laughed. "How do you know? You sleeping near her camp or something?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth," he said calmly, though his eyes were hard. "I know her because I've taken time to see her for who she is. You could do the same if you weren't so busy hating." The men went quiet for a moment. Then one muttered, "You'll regret defending her." Eli turned and walked away, not saying another word. That evening, he saddled his horse and rode straight toward the desert. The sun had dipped low, painting the land in deep gold and purple. He rode fast, his heart full of worry. When he reached Taya's camp, he found her sitting by the fire, grinding herbs. "They're blaming your people for the raid," he said, breathless. "I had to make sure you were all right." Taya's hand stopped moving. "I heard. My tribe had nothing to do with it. We've stayed away from the settlers for weeks." "I know that," Eli said, kneeling beside her. "But the town doesn't care about truth. They just need someone to blame." Taya's eyes dropped to the ground. "It's always been that way." For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft crackle of the fire. Then Eli said, "If they come here, promise me you'll hide in the hills. Don't try to talk to them." She looked at him quietly. "You think they'll come?" He hesitated. "They might." Her voice stayed calm. "Then I'll be ready." The next morning, Taya went to the edge of town to trade, unaware that a group of men had already gathered at the saloon. When they saw her, a few of them followed, whispering to each other. They didn't shout or threaten, just watched her every move, their stares sharp like knives. Eli arrived soon after, his heart pounding when he saw what was happening. He walked up to her in the middle of the street and said loudly enough for all to hear, "Taya, I brought that rope you asked for." The men stopped whispering. Their eyes flicked between him and her. Taya looked confused, but Eli gave her a small nod. She understood. It was his way of protecting her, making it look like their meeting was just business. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking the rope. He smiled. "You're welcome. Be safe heading home." Then he turned to the watching men. "She's got work to do, same as the rest of us. Let her be." The men didn't speak. One spat in the dirt, but they slowly backed away. That night, however, things took a darker turn. A wagon from the north came into town, carrying the rancher who'd been robbed. He claimed he'd seen an Apache woman near his land days before the raid. It wasn't Taya, she'd been miles away, but to the angry crowd, one name fit every face. By morning, rumors had spread that a group of men were planning to teach her a lesson. Eli's chest filled with fear. He didn't wait. He grabbed his horse, saddled up, and rode out before dawn. The wind whipped against his face as he pushed the horse faster. When he reached Taya's camp, she was already packing. "I know," she said before he could speak. "They'll come." "You can't stay here," he said. "Ride with me to the mountains. I'll keep you safe until this passes." She looked torn. "If I run, they'll say it's proof I'm guilty." "If you stay," he said softly, "they might destroy what's left of your home." Her eyes glistened in the morning light. She didn't want to run, but she trusted him. "All right," she said finally. They rode into the hills and found a small cave hidden by wild sage. For 2 days they stayed there, waiting. The air was cool and quiet, but Eli could see the sadness in Taya's eyes. She missed her grandmother, her camp, her peace. "I'm sorry," he said one night as they sat near a small fire. She looked at him gently. "For what?" "For the way my people treat yours." She shook her head. "You are not your people. You are you." He stared into the flames. "I wish they could see you the way I do." Her voice was soft. "Maybe one day they will." On the third morning, they rode back to her camp. The sun had risen high and the air shimmered with heat. When they arrived, Taya stopped her horse in shock. Her small hut was gone, burned to ashes. The earth was blackened, the smoke still faint in the air. Eli's chest tightened. He looked around, searching for any sign of who did it, but there was none. Just the silence of the desert. Taya stood still, her face calm though her heart ached. "It's all right," she said quietly. "They only burned wood. They can't burn who I am." Eli wanted to speak, to promise her he'd make things right, but there were no words strong enough. So he simply stood beside her, silent and steady. After a long time, she turned to him. "You should go back, Eli. You've already done enough." He shook his head. "I'm not leaving you alone." Taya looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and warmth. "Why do you care so much?" He met her gaze. "Because you deserve better than what this world's given you. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met." For the first time, she couldn't look away. The desert wind moved gently through her hair, carrying their unspoken words across the open land. That night, they built a small fire near the ashes of her old home. The flames flickered softly and Eli sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally, Taya said, "The fire took my home, but it didn't take my heart." Maybe that's what they can't understand. We are not the things they burn. Eli nodded slowly. "And I'm not the man they think I am." In that quiet, Something deeper formed between them, a bond not just of kindness but of faith. They didn't need to say the word love. It was already there, living in the space between their shared silence, burning quietly like the small fire before them. And though the night was dark, somewhere in the distance, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, for two souls who had chosen courage over fear and heart over hate. The desert stretched out before them, vast and quiet, as if holding its breath for what was about to happen. Taya and Eli stayed close to the burned remains of her hut for a few days, gathering what little supplies they could salvage. Every piece of cloth, every pot, every jar of herbs, Eli carried carefully, placing them in his saddlebag as if protecting something precious. He never once complained, never let the harsh heat or the weight of the load show on his face. Taya watched him, her heart both heavy and warm. She had lost much already, her home, the comfort of her camp, the quiet routine of her life, but Eli's presence brought a steady light she could lean on. His kindness, his courage, and his unwavering loyalty felt like a shield against the coldness of the world. "We can't stay here," Eli said one evening, as the sun painted the desert in soft pinks and golds. "It's not safe anymore. They won't stop until someone tells them they were wrong." Taya nodded. She had already known that. The townspeople's suspicion and fear ran too deep, like a river carving through rock. Staying in Dry Creek would only bring more trouble. "Where do we go?" she asked quietly. Eli looked toward the hills in the distance. "There's a small valley a day's ride from here. Few people go that way. We can build something there, a home of our own." Taya hesitated. Leaving the land she had known her whole life was not easy. The desert had taught her everything she knew, how to find water, how to tend the herbs, how to listen to the wind. Yet when she looked at Eli, she saw determination in his eyes, a promise that together they could make a new life. The next morning, they packed their remaining belongings and set out on horseback. The journey was long, but the desert offered its own kind of beauty. The soft sound of wind through sagebrush, the distant cries of hawks circling above, the golden light of dawn spreading over the hills. Taya felt a small thrill she had never experienced before, a sense of freedom, of possibility. By late afternoon, they arrived at the valley Eli had spoken of. It was small but perfect. A narrow stream ran through it, its water clear and cold. Wildflowers dotted the edges, and the hills surrounding it offered shelter from harsh winds. Taya breathed deeply, taking in the scent of fresh grass and earth. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. "We can build here," Eli said, dismounting. He reached out his hand to help her down. "You like it?" Taya nodded, her eyes bright. "It's beautiful, quiet, safe." They began their work immediately. Eli had learned enough from his years on the ranch to build a small cabin, using wood he scavenged from old fallen trees and stones from the riverbank. Taya helped too, her hands steady as she carried materials and tended a small fire for cooking. Each plank of wood, each stone they placed, was a step toward a life that belonged only to them. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, talking quietly. Taya told Eli about her childhood, her tribe's traditions, the plants she had learned to use for healing. Eli shared stories of his own, of his family in Texas, of his days as a young cowboy learning the land, and of the dreams he still carried for the future. Though their worlds had been so different, they found that their hearts understood one another. As weeks passed, the cabin slowly took shape. The walls were sturdy, the roof solid, and a small garden Taya planted began to grow along the side. Eli built a small pen for a few goats he had managed to trade for in town, and Taya tended the herbs that grew in the sun-drenched soil. Each day brought new challenges, fixing a leaking roof, patching holes in the walls, tending to the animals, but together, they faced them all one evening. As the sun set behind the hills, Taya sat outside the cabin, looking at the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. Eli joined her, carrying a small jug of fresh milk. They sat in silence for a while, sharing the simple comfort of each other's presence. "You know," Eli said softly, "I never thought I'd find someone like you, someone who sees the world clearly, who understands the quiet things that matter." Taya looked at him, a gentle smile forming. "I never thought I'd find someone who would see me for who I am," she said. He reached out and took her hand. "Then let's make a promise. No matter what happens, we'll face it together. This land, this life, we'll build it together. Taya felt warmth fill her chest. She nodded. Together, she whispered. Word of their departure from Dry Creek eventually reached the town. Whispers followed them like shadows. Some people laughed, thinking Eli had been foolish. Others were curious, wondering what kind of life the Apache woman and the cowboy could possibly make in isolation. But none of that mattered to Eli or Taya. They had found something more important than approval. They had found trust and partnership. The seasons changed, and with them came new challenges. Winter brought cold nights and frost that threatened their small garden. Eli built a small fire pit inside the cabin, and Taya learned to preserve herbs and food to last through the colder months. They worked together, always communicating, always supporting one another. Every small victory, every warm meal, every evening spent together by the fire strengthened the bond between them. As the years went by, the cabin became a home. They raised a few animals and cultivated the land as best they could. Taya's knowledge of herbs and medicine helped them stay healthy, and Eli's skills in ranching and carpentry ensured their home was sturdy and safe. Neighbors were few, but the solitude did not feel lonely. In fact, Taya sometimes laughed quietly to herself, thinking how strange it was that happiness could be found far from the town that had once mocked her. One day, a traveler came down the valley, a man looking for work. Eli and Taya welcomed him, offering food and water. They spoke politely, as they always did, and the man left with admiration for the life they had built. It was small, perhaps modest to outsiders, but it was full of dignity and love. Taya often thought of her tribe and the elders who had taught her to respect the land. She missed the comfort of her grandmother's wisdom, the stories of her childhood. Yet she also knew that she had created something new, something that combined the strength of her past with the promise of a future. Eli had become more than a friend. He had become a partner in every sense. Together they had survived cruelty, fear, and prejudice. Together, they had built a life where love and trust mattered more than words spoken by strangers. One evening, as the sun set over the valley, Eli and Taya stood outside the cabin. The sky was ablaze with orange and pink, the wind carrying the soft scent of sage and wildflowers. Eli looked at Taya, his eyes steady and warm. "You know," he said softly, "I've never regretted choosing this life." "Choosing you," Taya smiled, her heart full, "and I've never regretted trusting you. Even when it was hard, even when the world wasn't kind." Eli reached for her hand, holding it gently. "We've faced more than most people ever do, and yet here we are, together, stronger because of it." She squeezed his hand. "Together," she repeated. The valley around them was quiet, peaceful, and safe. The cabin stood as a symbol of courage and resilience, a place where love had taken root and grown despite the odds. For Taya, the young Apache woman who had once been mocked and judged, this was more than survival. It was proof that a heart, when met with understanding and respect, could flourish in even the harshest of places. Eli and Taya had chosen each other, and in doing so they had built not just a home, but a story that would live quietly in the valley for years to come. The townspeople of Dry Creek could say what they wanted, but the truth was simple: courage, kindness, and love could not be burned, mocked, or broken. As the stars appeared one by one in the deep desert sky, Taya leaned against Eli's shoulder. The wind whispered around them, carrying a gentle promise. They had faced fear and hatred, but they had chosen each other, and in that choice they found a world that was finally theirs. The cabin, the valley, the animals, and the small garden, they were not just possessions. They were proof that love and resilience could thrive even where others had tried to plant doubt. And as the night stretched on, the gentle light of the fire and the quiet rhythm of the desert reminded them both that the life they had chosen, though simple, was full of meaning. Together, they had built more than a home, they had built a future. Years passed, and the little cabin in the valley became more than just a home. It became a place of life, hope, and quiet strength. Taya and Eli had worked tirelessly to build it, but their reward was more than bricks, wood, or stone. It was the sense of belonging they had created together, a life that was theirs alone, untouched by the whispers of the past. Taya had grown more confident in herself and her knowledge of the land. She had learned to predict the coming of storms by watching the clouds, to find water even in the driest parts of the valley, and to use every herb, flower, and leaf for healing. People from distant ranches, miners, or travelers occasionally stumbled across their home, and she would offer aid without hesitation. Her kindness and knowledge became quietly famous among those who had the courage to venture into the desert. Eli, too, had grown. He became skilled at tending animals, planting crops, and crafting tools from the simplest materials. His patience and calm strength made him a natural protector, not just for Taya, but for anyone who found themselves in need. Yet even as their skills and reputation grew, the bond between them remained the most important thing in their lives. One spring morning, a traveling trader arrived at the valley. He had heard stories of a woman living in the hills who could cure a sick child with herbs, and of a cowboy who helped anyone in need. The trader, curious and respectful, approached cautiously. "Excuse me," he said politely. "I've heard tales of your kindness and skill. People say you help without asking for much in return." Taya smiled softly. "We help because it is right, not for praise," she said. Eli added, "And we believe the land provides for those who respect it. It's simple as that." The trader nodded. "Well, word spreads fast. Even in towns far away, people speak of you." Taya glanced at Eli, her eyes reflecting a quiet pride. She had come so far, from being mocked in Dry Creek to becoming someone respected, even admired by those who traveled through the frontier. The seasons continued their rhythm. Summers brought long, hot days where the work never ended, and winters brought cold nights and the challenge of preserving food and warmth. Yet through all this, Taya and Eli thrived, not because the world had become easier, but because they faced it together. One afternoon, as they sat by the river, Taya looked at Eli. "Do you ever think about the town?" she asked. Eli considered her question, his gaze on the flowing water. "Sometimes," he said. "I think about how things might have been, but I don't regret leaving. We built something better here, something true," she nodded. "Yes, and yet I wonder if one day they will understand. If one day they will see the person I am, not the stories they told about me." Eli reached for her hand, holding it gently. "They may never fully understand. But that doesn't matter. You know who you are, and that's all that counts." Years turned into decades. Their home grew. A few small cabins were built nearby, though still far enough to maintain privacy. People began to come for advice, for help, for guidance. Taya's knowledge of herbs and her calm wisdom made her sought after, and even Eli's quiet courage earned the respect of anyone who knew him. Together, they had created a small community built on trust, understanding, and respect. One day, a messenger from Dry Creek arrived. It had been many years since anyone from the town had seen Taya or Eli, and the messenger brought news. Some of the older townsfolk had begun to tell the truth, that the young Apache woman had never been guilty of the crimes blamed on her. They spoke of Eli, too, for standing by her and defending her when no one else would. When Taya heard this, she smiled softly. It was not a victory born from anger or revenge, but from time and truth. People had begun to realize slowly that courage and kindness could not be ignored forever. Eli noticed her quiet smile. "You look pleased," he said, raising an eyebrow. "I am," she said softly. "Not because they admitted they were wrong, but because the truth is finally out there, and they might remember it for the future." Years later, when Eli grew older and the work of the land became heavier, Taya took on more of the daily responsibilities. Yet Eli never truly slowed down. Together, they maintained the home they had built, ensuring that the valley remained a place of peace and safety. They had grown old together, their love deepened by shared struggles, laughter, quiet evenings, and countless small acts of care for one another. The world outside still held prejudice, and not every traveler was kind. Yet anyone who arrived in their valley was met with warmth and respect. People learned, even if slowly, that a woman could be strong and gentle, wise and skilled, and that a man could be brave without being cruel. Taya and Eli embodied these lessons, living them every day. Eventually, Eli grew frail, his hair silver and his hands marked by years of work. Taya stayed by his side, tending to him as he had once tended to her. When his last days came, the townspeople from Dry Creek who had heard the stories traveled to the valley to pay their respects. Those who had once mocked Taya now bowed their heads, realizing the injustice they had carried in their hearts so long ago. When Eli passed, Taya felt the loss deeply, but she also felt gratitude. He had chosen love over fear, courage over approval, and in doing so, he had given her a life full of meaning. She knew that his spirit would always remain with her, in the wind, in the river, and in the quiet strength of the land they had nurtured together. In the years that followed, Taya continued to live in the valley. She tended her garden, cared for travelers, and taught anyone willing to learn about the land, the herbs, and the quiet ways of life that had been passed down from her people. She never married again, for Eli had been her companion, her partner, her equal in every sense. Yet she lived fully, surrounded by memories of love, courage, and the home they had built together. The story of Taya and Eli became a quiet legend in the region. People spoke of the young Apache woman who had once been mocked, and the cowboy who had chosen kindness and love above all else. They spoke of how the two of them had survived prejudice, hardship, and loss, creating a life that reflected the strength of the human heart and the beauty of compassion. Even long after Taya passed away, the valley remained. Travelers told stories of the cabin by the stream, of the garden that bloomed even in dry seasons, and of the lessons Taya and Eli had left behind. Their life together became a symbol of courage, understanding, and love, a testament to the truth that hearts could rise above hate, and that people could choose one another even when the world was unkind. The desert wind, which once carried whispers of mockery and fear, now seemed to carry something different. It carried the story of two people who had chosen to live with honesty, patience, and love. It carried proof that even in a world full of judgment, human hearts could create something lasting and meaningful. And so, the story of the young Apache woman and the cowboy who chose love endured, not because of fame or wealth, but because it spoke to something everyone understands, that courage, kindness, and the choice to love can change a life, a community, and even a world, one quiet act at a time. Taya and Eli had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy far greater than any words of mockery could ever erase. The valley stood as their monument, and the wind whispered their names, a reminder to all who passed that even in the harshest places, love and courage could flourish.